they are now connected through mobile, going through the mobile networks.
Right.
I cannot get a Wi-Fi and just put it there and suddenly provide the coverage. I need to hook that up, right, to the network. It is not there. And for the remaining 4 billion people, there is no Wi-Fi. I mean, you cannot even think about deploying that. And what is happening to the wire in the US, the big companies here, operators gave up on deploying fiber. So we are talking about 10 gigabits per second with 5G. Okay? So that's data rate higher than my wired links. I mean, there's no more deployments to increase your wired data rates. So this is, I mean,
I think that's a compelling concept.
Big picture. I mean, you cannot just say Wi-Fi. It's not that way. I mean, isolated thinking.
Right.
I want to make comments here. I mean, I think you just made our point with your example, because the same people that can barely afford one subscription, they're not going to get 20 subscriptions for all their things. They're going to create a Wi-Fi hotspot, and everything's going to go through there.
Well, that brings up a question.
So, anyways.
I'm going to cut in because we've danced around the subject a little bit. So I'm just going to flat out ask the question. Transformational. What about Google and Facebook and organizations like Internet.org? Is that 5G? How is that going to transform? How is that going to impact 5G and IoT, or is it? Anyway.
So I think we can't talk about all the stuff we are doing with other companies, but I think Google and Facebook are looking into different modes of communication using spectrum. We saw Facebook having deploying solar powered planes in hard to access areas, right? And you can use, people are working on licenses.
So just to clarify, those planes, isn't that LTE?
It is LTE, I don't know the details, but
it is LTE.
It can be 5G or whatever. But you can also do license assisted access, where
right.
you can do share spectrum from the military, and all those things are going around.
Mm-hmm.
How to use unused spectrum to enhance your experience. But I'd like to tell you, you have to increase the 10,000, 20,000, 40,000 increase the capacity. You can't use below 6 gigahertz. You have to go above 6 gigahertz. And what Farooq pointed out, the spectrum above 6 gigahertz is way cheaper than 900 or 700 gigahertz.
I see. Andrea, did you want to respond to the, how will Google and Facebook, does that transform the equation or change the equation?
Yeah, I mean, being in the middle of Silicon Valley, and certainly Google, they hired Craig Barrett, the CEO of Atheros, to drive their access and energy group. So they have plans, I believe, to be disruptive, and they can be disruptive because their business model is completely different from everybody else, that's making money off wireless. They don't want to necessarily make money off wireless. They view those pipes as critical for how they do make money, which is off search and data collection and so forth. So they absolutely have the potential to be disruptive because they're a 300-pound gorilla. They don't need to go by the standards. They can come up with their own standard if they want, and if they just deploy it for free, in these remote places like the drones and the balloons and all of that, they can create networks for the people that aren't connected today. They can also, they're deploying fiber in cities in the United States. So I think that they are a threat to existing business models and existing wireless service providers. It's not exactly clear what they're doing or how to deal with that threat, but I think that
there's a lot of balloons that we've had.
Yeah. But that said, Google is not a wireless company, and so the threat that they pose has to be taken with that as well. That can they really take over wireless service providing? I don't think they can, because that's not their expertise, and it's also a tough business and takes a lot of learning to do it right.
Well, hypothetically, if Google and Facebook are successful, what does that mean for 5G?
Are successful in
deploying to the last 2 billion, where they have drones or balloons that are flying at access. Does that impact IoT or
What spectrum
Or-
they're looking
Well, currently they're looking at using LTE license bands in the countries where they're flying the drones.
at? So see, but if you look at 5G, you need to, how do you get those additional? How do you get those additional capacity? And the thing that you need to be reliable, you need to have a carrier-grade network. Understand that if you are not careful, like Nokia is not careful about future, like you see, like this trend, it will go away. You see, you have to continuously innovate, and that's what we are doing with 5G. Continuously innovate, having a business model which will be successful in the future. So what we are doing, you see, we are looking at all aspects, like looking at multi-RAN, different RAN using a common baseband platform. We are looking at how to improve the architecture, 5G architecture, with all the, as I said, all the control and network function in the cloud, and so on and so forth. So we are looking the whole 5G issues for supporting this huge Internet of Things in a holistic way. And we'll come out with the standards which are reliable, efficient, and spectral efficient, as well as energy efficient.
So, to summarize, Farooq, I'll continue just a minute. So, it seems like in order to realize the 5G vision, we do need a carrier-grade network. And I'm trying to understand whether that means what, perhaps, we don't know exactly what Google or Facebook are doing, but someone providing service to 2 to 3 billion users that don't have access to broadband wireless, that's largely irrelevant to the 5G.
As Farooq pointed out, as all this new spectrum opens up, it will eventually become cheap, which will be so that those 2 billion users can access. Everybody gets connected.
I see. So once millimeter wave spectrum is available in those regions, they'll have access to 5G technology. Farooq?
Yeah, I think the way we are looking at it, why in 5G we are excluding satellite-based or UAVs, these type of access. The way we are looking at it, satellites were already using millimeter waves, as you know. So what our view is, you create one radio access technology now that can scale to ground-based systems, unmanned aerial vehicles, or even satellites. So operated in the millimeter wave, where you have so much spectrum available, even if you want to share across these different platforms, that would not be an issue. And again, I think it's not like sending a balloon to Africa will solve the problem. You need to think about the scalability. Again, the big backhaul issue that I bring up, how you bring back the data to the internet, because there's no wide network. Then you do maybe 10 hops to bring it to, and then you run into the scalability issues, right? So those technologies we see as complementary, not competing to 5G. Actually, 5G should encompass, include those technology in its definition. Yeah.
Robert, did you have a point?
Yeah, I just wanted to give, I guess, an answer to your original question about the disruption of Facebook and Google. And I see 3 things that are key, and that's actually
Potential disruption.
Potential disruptions that I think are going to help out the businesses of the colleagues on my left and right here. The one is this, so the alternate means of delivering internet access through the UAVs, balloons, et cetera here, that's going to create market for more of their technology, more things to be sold. I think that's how we get back. The second is, as already mentioned also, is fiber. I've had Google digging in my neighborhood now for 6 months, trenching the fiber, which is a whole other story. But once there's this fiber there, consumers will finally be like, hey, this is what I can do with 1 gigabit per second. I remember answering on my neighborhood listserv, people are like, well, why should I get this Google Fiber? I don't need a gigabit per second. I'm trying to explain to them why they need it. Once they have it, they'll realize they needed it, and then they'll be like, hey, why isn't my wireless giving me 5G giving me gigabit per second? And there will be also fiber around that can be used for backhaul, potentially much cheaper than the extortion that's being charged by some companies. So we can have a lot more small cells backhaul, a lot more small cells sold, a lot more millimeter wave. And then the final one was, I think I forgot it now. Google. Yeah, I don't know. There was a third one that was really good.
It was the Department of Energy.
For Google,
Sorry.
for Google, the last 100 meters can be wireless, and there you can use the access points.
Yeah. I want to make a quick comment about this notion that networks need to be carrier grade, because so I live right off Sand Hill Road in Menlo Park, where all the VCs are, most expensive real estate in California, and I cannot make a cell phone call driving up Sand Hill Road when I get on 280. This is with an LTE phone. I couldn't do it with a 3G phone or a 2G phone either. It's hilly and there's trees. So the notion that LTE or cellular is carrier grade is just not true. There's always going to be places where there's coverage holes. And there's also notions of carrier grade Wi-Fi too. There's companies that have whole businesses around enterprise grade or carrier grade Wi-Fi. So, and the flip side of that is if you go to these 2 billion people that have no connectivity, do they even know what carrier grade means? I mean, if they can make a crappy phone call, that's revolutionary for them. If they can get low rate data link, that's revolutionary for them. They don't have connectivity. So the notion that they need carrier grade communication doesn't make sense. So I think both of those things are a bit of a pushback on this notion that we can only use licensed spectrum for a lot of the Internet of Things applications, even life critical, because again, if that remote operation is happening on Sand Hill Road where my telephone call gets dropped, I certainly can't do anything worse.
And so what does Quintana do?
So Quintana is a Wi-Fi chipset vendor that just announced 10 gigabit. But no, I mean both my startups are Wi-Fi based, you know. So, but look, that's because you can't do a startup in the cellular world. I mean, you can't get funded for it. You can't ever break into the cellular business. So yes, it's true. I'm a big believer in Wi-Fi. But the reason is that innovation happens there very quickly. The spectrum is free. And Wi-Fi has transformed the world. And it's still true that on this smartphone, you will go to Wi-Fi first today. And I bet you will do that in 5G too, because it's cheaper.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Robert real quick.
Oh yeah, sorry.
You remembered the third thing.
I remember my third one, which I'm embarrassed because I talked about it this morning, was actually the transportation. I mean, Google's work on the autonomous vehicle. I mean, we weren't talking about autonomous vehicles seriously 3 years ago. Right. And now everybody seems to be doing it, and they're coming in 1, 2, 5, 20 years, whatever. But I think that when people realize that they want to take advantage of sensor data created from other cars or other infrastructure in a very timely manner, and then they're going to be like, hey, how can we do that? We need big fat data pipe with very low latency. And that is a key use case for 5G. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to drive a really...
That's a good question. I will go to Amitava and then I'll ask a question. Did you want to respond to the...
No, I think my response is that I think both unlicensed and licensed band will coexist peacefully, as we've seen for the 4G. Okay, my question is, we haven't talked a lot about vehicle to vehicle. We talked about autonomous vehicles, but what about automobiles in general, vehicle to vehicle, HFCP, those types of standards? Should they be considered part of the 5G umbrella, or should they go away and 5G just subsume those types of standardization for vehicle? It was maybe Robert could respond to this.
Yeah, I'll comment on that. I think there's an opportunity for 5G to play a much bigger role there. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons that vehicle to vehicle became standardized and was discussed, and one of those is actually infrastructure. If you think about it, in cities, the municipalities don't have a lot of money to repair the roads. You know this from driving around Austin here. And they certainly don't want to have to build and deploy their own infrastructure to support vehicle-to-infrastructure communication networks. That's kind of like one of the reasons that B2B is so attractive, because you don't need the infrastructure. But cellular is going to have infrastructure there. And so cellular could become the provider of the infrastructure for these B2B, B2I networks. And there's no reason B2B can't happen through the infrastructure, right? I can just talk to the base station, talk to the other car. I mean, that's...
If you go, just looking at the assumption from the panel, from the, describing 5G, ubiquitous coverage, right? Reliable ubiquitous coverage. And then you augment that with companies that are looking at providing broadband cellular service to the rest of the world. it seems like the need for vehicle-to-vehicle, why not just use a 5G network?
But the architecture has to be modified, so you have to, all these applications should reside at the edge of the network, because then if you put this in the cloud, you can't satisfy the latency requirement for B2B, which is critical. So the 5G architecture will be comprised of these network slices, where each network slice will have different applications in mind. And that's how, as I said, 5G will be an architecture concept, it will be a radio concept, it will be an application. So it will encompass all these three areas.
Okay. Andrew?
Yeah. So just to follow up a little bit on your comment and also answer the question. So it's not that I believe cellular networks are going to go away, because they don't. I was actually, interestingly, asked that question when I was giving a talk at Broadcom about a year ago. Someone from Broadcom asked me, so are cellular networks going to go away? And I said, are you kidding? You know, and the real, I think that